Jim Braddy has been the superintendent of the Assemblies of God, Northern California and Nevada District since 2007. He and his wife Judy have been in ministry for decades. Today we discuss how to live out our faith in this culture and the part faith has played in their lives, so don't go away.
Together we serve our God, we serve the constituency of our churches, but just as important, we serve our communities. We find ways to take the gospel into the marketplace. And put the gospel where people are.
Welcome Jim Braddy, Superintendent of the Assemblies of God, Northern California and Nevada District, and his wife, author and public speaker, Judy. And actually, Judy, you're also an ordained minister.
That's right.
So
I am.
I'm gonna add that. Appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So, when did you first decide you wanted to go into ministry, Jim?
I was 12 years old. My
Really?
father had been a minister, and at a prayer meeting on a Tuesday night in 1958 at the Edwardsville Assembly of God, I felt the call of God on my life. That summer, 1958, I held my first revival. And I don't know that I said anything of consequence, but I said it loudly. And I received my first credential with the Assemblies of God in 1963 while I was in high school. And really, I've never wanted to do anything but be in ministry for that whole period of time.
You actually became pastor elsewhere first.
I was youth pastor first. Judy and I went to Southern California after I graduated from Bible college. Found out I was a closet Californian, came out of the closet, enjoyed the West Coast, came from the Midwest.
Beautiful here.
Yeah, it is.
You woke up.
I came from Illinois to San Diego. I thought I died and gone to heaven.
Two Midwestern transplants.
And youth pastor, we have spent time 10 years in Alaska pastoring and planting a church. Been a youth pastor here in this area, directed Youth for Christ in Portland, Oregon for 3 years, and then finally settled in 1982. We settled here in Northern California, Nevada as pastors and then with the district.
I think I figured one time, Debbie, that in 32 years we had moved 26 times. So it was kind of a lot of moving around
Sometimes
in the early days.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, at the time, I think we just kept going and didn't really think about it and knew that we were doing what we were supposed to do. So.
And look how it prepared you for what you've been doing over the last
right.
few years. And when did you decide to become a minister?
Well, Jim and I have kind of a similar background in that I think both of us found the Lord at a fairly young age and really did feel a call to ministry. I was about the same age, like 12 or so. Of course, you know, it was a little different for me because I ended up just doing a lot of different things before I finally went to Bible school, which is where we met. And as they say, the rest is history. And so that's when we...
That's what I was going to ask. How did you know he was the one?
Well, I wasn't too sure right at first, but when we really met, that was kind of it. We really just had the 1 year in Bible school together, and we were married the next summer. So I guess it didn't take very long to figure out that he was the one.
So when you signed on, you knew what you were in for from the very beginning, or
no? No. I said he made it through 4 years of Bible college. I only made it through 1, and then we got married, and that's when my education began.
Do you ever look back? Do you ever wish you did something else? I think you had said no.
I tried once. I thought I would like to become a school teacher.
Yes.
And I took a semester at a school preparing for that. But I was so out of sorts with myself and with my calling that I quickly went ahead and went back into ministry. I knew that's not what I was supposed to do.
So you probably recognize that too in supporting it.
Yeah, Jim, I think his real strengths are in administration, you know, leadership. He was involved in a couple of parachurch ministries along the way there and did very well at everything that he did, but I think our real heart and our real love was in the church, in the pastoring ministry, and then, you know, of course, later in leadership, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Well, in terms of leadership, from pastor to leader, what was that transition like, and how do you support him in that?
Well, for me, you shift from leading a congregation to leading and ministering to leaders who lead congregations. And so your language has to change, your approach has to change. You, at times, unfortunately, have less time for real interpersonal interaction. That was the difficult transition. I love being with a congregation. I love
That's
going to
true.
the hospital visits and sitting by bedsides praying for people, or the good old potluck dinners.
Yes.
And as in my position now, I don't get that kind of close interaction.
That's a good point, because there's probably 120,000 constituents or more
Yes.
that basically the Lord has placed you over,
Yes.
but you don't see them often.
Right.
And for me, I think it was a little more of a challenge. You know, Jim is always one to be up for a new challenge, and so for him it was exciting. But you know, in the church, I also had an automatic venue for ministry, and so when he went into the leadership position, it took me a little while to really find my niche, and so it was a little bit different at that point. But I will say that that's when the Lord began to open the doors of ministry in writing for me, because finally, after all the years of pastoring, I had a little more time to do that. And that was the direction then that my life began to take.
So you knew you were committed, you knew you were called. So the circumstances might change, but you didn't give up.
Oh,
You weren't
no.
giving up.
No.
Neither
No.
one of you, actually.
No, honestly, I could not see myself doing anything differently. I cannot see myself doing anything differently in the future. At some level, I will, whatever happens in the future, be engaged in ministry, because I go back to this, it's not a profession I chose, it's a calling God put on my heart.
Wow.
That makes it different than anything else.
Well, I have more questions for you, on marriage, on togetherness, and on the future. So more with Jim and Judy Braddy when we return.
You've got to let some of the light show through, and you've got to let them see some of the struggles that you go through so they can identify.
I remember telling the counselor when we went there, we're not here because our marriage is in trouble. We're here because we want to finish well.
We're back, and we know you both on a very professional level. You have accomplished more in your lifetime than most people would ever dream of doing. But the personal level, I want to get into that a little bit. Now, in terms of kids, you have how many kids and how many grandkids?
We have 3 grown sons and 5 intelligent, beautiful, adorable grandchildren who are now also almost all grown.
The oldest is 21, the youngest is 10. So
Yeah.
quite an age span. And most all of them, though, are grown. We just have the one 10-year-old.
We don't know where all those years went.
No, and that I understand as well. So you know the youth culture, you know about the kids. What is that culture like today? For instance, when I was in a youth group, we did volleyball and basketball. Those were the things you always had to have, and then we were all there. What is it like now?
I would say very different.
Very different. It's no longer Leave It to Beaver and Wally and that genre. That's gone. I think the most unique thing about young people today are their ties to technology. You do not see a teenager without their cell phone, their iPad, or their device. And so I think ministering today is more of a challenge because, quite frankly, attention spans have shrunk enormously.
Yes.
So what you do in order to keep them engaged and involved has to be a little more rapid fire, has to engage some of that technology with it. To stand up and do what I did when I was a youth pastor, talk to them for 30 minutes, would never work today.
No.
Not at all. Not at all.
Interesting perspective.
That's right. Well, I think, having grandchildren kind of keeps you current with some of that. I remember when my second oldest grandson was about 8 years old, I had just gotten a new computer program, and I was struggling with PowerPoint, and he was going out the door to school, and he said, when I get home from school, Grandma, I'll show you how to do it. So that, helps you know the difference.
Same with me, struggling with something, and my daughter was able to figure it out for me in seconds.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
I find young people like to be engaged in ministry too. They don't just
Yes.
want to be talked to.
Want to be real.
One of the key things, and we started doing this early in our ministry in Alaska, we started taking youth groups on missions trips. And we still do that today. Our youth department sends 150 to 200 kids overseas every single summer to be engaged, hands-on.
Yes, they want to help.
And it's not just sitting back and being lectured or even being entertained. It's taking them to see the real world and getting involved themselves. And I think that's a change from when I grew up in the 50s and 60s. We never did anything like that.
Right,
Today,
right.
that seems to be a real norm and a catch point for young people.
That's right. You know, one of the maybe biggest complaints we hear about young people in the church is that, you know, the entitlement generation, the me generation. But I think today's young people have a tremendous capacity for compassion.
Right.
I just think they need to be challenged and channeled into that.
You spent a great deal of time in ministry, and would you say that when you're involved in ministry, it's all-encompassing?
Yes, yes, it is. And I think that there were a lot of years when we were kind of running in circles and sometimes going in a lot of different directions. And, you know, the one thing that I would say, you know, perhaps if there are pastors watching today, that one of the critical things is just to make sure that you make time as you're ministering to others to nurture your own relationship. And, you know, there have been some rough bumps along the way, and we've worked our way through them, but you know, those are things that you really have to be intentional about, particularly in ministry.
I think for those that are successful, certainly pastors who grow large churches, it can consume them, and everything revolves around that. And for me in leadership, that's a challenge. It's a constant struggle because, again, with today's devices, you're never out of touch.
That's right.
You always have somebody that wants a piece of your time. Judy's one book on sabbaticals was not just about taking a sabbatical, but it's learning every day to do certain things that get you out of the suit and tie mode or the collar mode,
That's right.
and just be a normal human being.
Incorporating Sabbath principles into everyday life.
So you've read her book.
I have.
Yes.
I was probably the topic for her book.
You may have come up on a couple shows that we
But
talked
no
about when
names
she
were
was on.
mentioned to
No
protect
names were
the
ever
innocent.
mentioned.
Yeah.
But you are an author, and
Yes.
this is what is one of your favorite works that you've done?
Well, you know, that's a hard question for an author to answer because they're all like your babies, you know. But I have to say that probably my first book was a book called Prodigal in the Parsonage. It was about a difficult journey that we took with our oldest son. And that book is still in print today because I think it still ministers to a real need in the ministry community. But the books have kind of followed our journey in the respect that the first book was about prodigal children. The last one was about taking a Sabbath. So I think you realize that at some point you need the rest.
Yes.
And so I think probably the Sabbath book has been my favorite up to this point.
I like True North. It's about Alaska.
Well, yes.
Yeah, that you would.
And
You
that
would
was
actually.
about going through change, yeah.
I'd like to say that I appreciate the fact that you share and you're real. And, you know, often you think if somebody is a pastor or in leadership, you know, they don't go through what I go through. And I appreciate your honesty and your willingness to share that you have gone through some tough times. You know, I'm going to ask you, is it easy or perfect being in the ministry? You got 30 seconds to answer that.
I used to say every minister should be transparent. I now say you should be translucent. There's some things in your life that are between you and God, you and your wife, and you and your children. But if you're going to be successful and identify with people and let them see that you walk on solid ground like they do, you've got to let some of the light show through, and you've got to let them see some of the struggles that you go through so they can identify. Jesus became flesh.
Yeah.
We have to become that flesh as well
right.
to our congregations.
Wow. Well, we have one more second. I want to know what you're going to do next. So more with Jim and Judy when we return.
In 48 years, there are a lot of seasons that
That's
you
true,
go
too.
through, both in marriage and in ministry. And we've just had to learn to survive those seasons as they move from one to the other. And the best way to do that is to keep the lines of communication open.
Welcome back. All right, being translucent, how does that play out in, for instance, relationships?
Do you want to answer that? Or do you want me to?
I think,
Because you bring up a good point. There are things to kind
there
of...
are some things in your life and in your past that's where they need to remain. You have a very private relationship, all of us, with the Lord. Judy's relationship is not dependent upon her relationship with the Lord is not dependent on mine. And so there are some things you take to the Lord and some issues of life that you have to wrestle with. But there are other things. We are connected. We've been married for almost 48 years. So there's some things that we have learned to share.
Wow.
We have learned to work through even major differences that we have to talk. We have to communicate. And we have to find ways when we communicate not to tear the other person down or to put their ideas down.
We've had to learn like everybody else does, you know, and the only way that you learn is through experience. I always feel sad, you know, when I hear of marriages not surviving, you know, because of difficulties, because I just always want to say if they would have just held in there a little bit longer. I know there are a lot of extenuating circumstances, don't get me wrong, but I know that we've had to work hard over the years. Jim talked about, you know, not being perfect, and I think if people feel that somehow your relationship, your children, your marriage is perfect, they're not going to be able to relate to that. That doesn't mean that you have to tell all or tell everything. And there are just a lot of things that we've had to learn. In 48 years, there are a lot of seasons that you go through, both in marriage and in ministry. And we've just had to learn to survive those seasons as they move from one to the other. And the best way to do that is to keep the lines of communication open.
I think you never should be afraid of bringing someone else into the equation. If there are patches of difficulty, sometimes Christians avoid counselors because they think that things are really, really bad. No, I go to the doctor for a physical, not because I'm in some physical distress, but to make sure that there's nothing happening and that I am doing well. And I think that's where a good Christian counselor, I would suggest that to anyone, that from time to time they just see a good Christian counselor to work on those issues.
I know a few years ago, Jim and I took a test to determine kind of our temperaments and all that.
Yes.
That was very revealing. You would think.
Is this one of those translucent dialogues or not?
You'd think after 34 years, which is how long we'd been married at that point, that you knew everything about that person. But we discovered we had some surprises. There were some things. But I remember telling the counselor when we went there, we're not here because our marriage is in trouble. We're here because we want to finish well. We want our marriage to be better than it was even in the beginning. And that's what we've always striven to do.
And let me take a moment on that. Again, thanks for bringing that up about counseling too, because premarital counseling is really useful as well.
Absolutely,
sure.
Yes. In fact, my husband has performed a lot of weddings over the years, and one of the things that he's always required is that the couple meet with him at least 3 or 4 times, because there are just some things you can't prevent everything, but sometimes you can prevent some things, and it's very important.
Have there been those times when you've thought this is never going to work?
Oh, between us or between
No.
In counseling, I have done some counseling when we pastored where I knew that the marriage probably would not survive, partly because people would not take your advice or they ignored what you felt were key components of any marriage. And usually I was pretty predictive, not often, but you could see that you had two people who were passionate about each other, but not on a very in-depth basis.
And I think we have a lot of misconceptions about what marriage is.
Which leads us, tell it, if you don't mind, a few principles of how someone can improve their marriage watching now. I mean, obviously counseling's important and seeing both sides, but if somebody really wants to improve their marriage that's watching right now, are there some things they can start with?
Well, I think one of the most important things, as I already said, is to keep the lines of communication open. But, there's an old principle, and it's still as true as it was ever, and that is that by putting the other person first, I think most marriages hit bumps and some of them hit the rocks because we're too selfish. We want only our own interests to be served. And I think that there's a lot to be said for making sure that you serve the interests of the other person and that you both give as much as you take out of that relationship.
It's a partnership.
Yep.
And if couples don't see their marriage as a partnership, it means somebody is in charge and somebody is forcing their views, their ways. And it can be a simple thing as the television.
Right.
It can be a simple thing about where do we eat tonight. It can be minor things that can expand and grow into major issues. In fact, they usually do. If you're going to be dominant here and demand here, you're probably going to demand in other areas.
Wow.
So you have to understand, this is my partner. This is my life's partner.
Right.
And it's amazing the stuff my husband will watch with me on TV now. And
Yes.
every now and then
I
I even
really
watch
don't
it.
want to talk about it.
I have a good husband too. So we have 60 seconds. This has just flown by. I appreciate
It
you
has.
both being here. 450 churches, 120,000 or more under what you do. And I see a humble man in front of me. Words like passion have been used to describe. I see humility. I see love. I see love for a wife. I see a tremendous man of God. And I want to thank you for being here and speak to that, and then what's ahead. All
I'm here
in
to
60
serve.
seconds.
I'm here to serve. I see myself as a servant. Sure, I'm in leadership, but the best way I can lead this district is serving them, discovering and getting from God a vision for our future. So what I see for the future of Northern California and Nevada Assemblies of God is my ability to cast vision, my ability to communicate that and get buy-in to the vision. And together we serve our God, we serve the constituency of our churches, but just as important, we serve our communities.
Yeah.
We find ways to take the gospel into the marketplace.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And put the gospel where people are
Oh.
in real life, not just in preaching, but in our life, through compassion, through touching them. That's where I see us going over the next few years. God gives us in ministry.
And I
That's
can
right.
see your call in that. And who can come to any Assemblies of God church in the area, in Northern California or
Anyone is
Nevada?
welcome.
Anyone is
There are
welcome.
450 locations. We've got as many locations as McDonald's.
All right.
There you go.
For more information about today's topics or to contact our guest directly, go to agncn.org or ktln.tv. Remember that KTLN is a donor-supported ministry, and programs like this one are made possible through your support. Thanks for being with us, and join us again next week.